Good evening. Welcome to my channel. As you can see, you may have come here for the lecture, but you'll be staying here for the fish. And maybe for someone else. Tana, get over here. Tana. Tana. My boy, my firstborn son, Tuna. My Tuna. He's a sweet boy. But as I said, every other bite of food I take, I have to pick one of his hairs off it. Now that's an exaggeration, but it's not much of an exaggeration. So, you'll see other cats in future lectures. But welcome to my channel. I'm going to be splitting my videos into smaller blocks for ease of consumption. So this first video is going to cover two things: an acknowledgement of the crisis of the world situation right now, and announcements about our course. So, as I noted in one of my emails that I sent out earlier, I feel that I have a moral responsibility to you to be compassionate and understanding and patient during this incredibly stressful global pandemic. So I would encourage each and every one of you to stay out of public places, limit your contact with people outside your household, to be safe. As there's, of course, there's the assumption that young people aren't going to be affected by the virus too badly, but why take a risk on it? I've read in my anxious news reading, I've read about multiple young healthy people who died from respiratory failure due to the virus. But don't panic at the same time. I know some of you are feeling really anxious, but just remember that a panic attack can also make it really hard to breathe. So if it's really hard to breathe, that doesn't mean you're dying from coronavirus. Just try to be careful, be aware of your own body's needs, and also try to stay in regular contact with other people who can check in on you, look after you, and help you feel less isolated. So I understand that this is a trying time for many of you. I've reached out via email, and that's why I've made a few changes in the syllabus. On the side of being more lenient because our circumstances are a lot different from when we began the course. So I'm not going to start applying late penalties until papers are more than 3 days late, but if you secure an extension with me, there's not going to be any late penalties. You just need to clear it with me. Easy peasy. I'm happy to grant extensions to people who are in need. And another change in the syllabus that pertains to weekly reading responses. I feel like sticking to a specific word count requirement is kind of arbitrary, so I'll be satisfied if you clearly, thoroughly answer the questions that I send out to you. So don't fret about writing enough words, just fret about giving a clear, thorough answer. And previously, another change, I was allowing students to take 2 passes on reading responses without affecting their course grade. And now I'm making that 3. So you have 3 passes on your reading responses before it affects your course grade. And if you taken passes before this, yes, they carry over. So I just felt like there needed to be a little more flexibility with that. And then finally, last change, the page range that I was requiring for your analytical papers was 5 to 6 pages. I changed it to 4 to 6 pages to reduce the writing load on people who need it. But please be sure to clearly and thoroughly address every element of the prompt in your papers. It might take you 4 pages, it might take you 6 pages to do this. I'm looking for quality above all. And I know I made a lot of changes in the syllabus recently, but I'm planning to keep it stable from now on. The only reason I might change something is if I am absolutely unable to access certain readings and certain readings electronically. So I might have to find a replacement reading. And there's one final announcement that's relevant to our course, so that the university is automatically switching all courses to a credit, no credit system. I'm sure you've seen the announcement. They sent out a lot of different details. You're going to need a C in the course to receive credit. Credit, no credit option won't affect your GPA. The credit, no credit courses will count towards your graduation requirements. But instead of taking this automatic credit, no credit grade, you have the option, if you think you're doing well in a class, to ask for a letter grade. If you're trying to boost your GPA and you need this. And students, according to UVA, are going to have to make that decision whether they want credit, no credit, or a letter grade. But Tuesday, April 28th, my dad's birthday. And of course I'm happy to provide estimates of your final grade in advance of that date. And you also have some grades posted on Colab that you can see. And before I end this video, I think it's worth dwelling for a moment on how Christian theologies of liberation are relevant to this current global pandemic. Because I do a type of theology that is championed by the 20th century German theologian Paul Tillich, and he believed that theology in every changing age needed to adjust itself to speak to the unique existential concerns of that age. So theology, I mean, just the notion that theology needs to be able to answer like crises, like existential crises that aren't only like spiritual, but that pertains to the existence of human beings on earth. So theology should be able to respond to this particular situation. So how are theologies of liberation, what we've been learning in this course, relevant to our current world situation? And you can think about this yourself, like reflect on it if you'd like to. But for my part, I think that something that both theologies of liberation and the coronavirus reveal is that class matters. Your socioeconomic class matters. In fact, your physical survival, economically and medically, hinges on your socioeconomic class. And of course, it's the Latin American liberation theology of people like Leonardo Boff and Gustavo Gutierrez, who firmly set the poor, the economically deprived, at the center of their liberationist theological reflection. And you look at the world today, and in the midst of this pandemic, and you see like countless people across this country, service workers, retail workers, who were laid off because their employers were forced to cut hours, cut employees because of the coronavirus. And there are countless people who've lost their health insurance when they were laid off, or they couldn't afford health insurance to begin with. Like on a personal note, my spouse was actually laid off when all of the dining halls closed because they were working with Aramark, who has a contract with UVA to provide food for the dining halls. So all of those people who were working supplying food to the dining halls are just out of a job. Like they're out of luck. It's a very bad situation for them. I mean, in this country, there are countless people who are uninsured or underinsured who might be seriously ill, like who might be on the brink of death, but they either don't want to call an ambulance or they don't want to go to the emergency room because they don't want to be slapped with a $10,000 medical bill. I mean, that's another way in which class matters right now. Class matters. If you can't afford insurance, that makes it that much harder to get treatment for the coronavirus. And I mean, even if you do get to the doctor, for some people, you may not be able to afford the prescriptions. So there's a lot of, there's an enormous economic issue here where not having sufficient financial resources could literally cost you your life. And I mean, I could go on, but suffice it to say that there's a tremendous amount of vulnerability, fragility in this country right now. And among those most vulnerable, like I said, to the coronavirus are the poor. Those who are economically now at a loss as to what to do. I mean, they may not want to be called the poor. So just like those people who are economically at a loss, they don't know what they're going to do. They've lost their job, they may not have health insurance, and they're not sure how they're even going to pay their rent. Those people are the ones most vulnerable to the coronavirus, dying from the coronavirus. Of course, I'm sure you've probably seen that celebrities with no symptoms are being tested for coronavirus, while poorer people with symptoms are pushed to the side and not even tested. That's what money can buy you in the United States. It can buy you your life. So I guess my question is, what would a theology of liberation say? And especially a class-centered theology of liberation, like that of Gutierrez and Boff, about our present situation. Well, I think that Gutierrez would foreground the moral responsibility that we have towards others, and especially the moral responsibility that we have towards those who are economically at a loss right now. And further, I think that Gutierrez's concept of the preferential option for the poor is relevant right now, and always relevant. As we determined together in class quite some time ago, Gutierrez's preferential option for the poor, it refers to God's loving, continuous prioritization of the poor in history, as revealed through the biblical narratives. And according to Gutierrez, the Christian love for the poor is grounded in God's own preferential love and in God in Christ's identification with the outcast and Christ's advocacy for the defenseless. So a person makes a preferential option for the poor when they actively decide to be oriented towards those in need, when they make a daily commitment to be in intentional, intensive solidarity with the marginalized. As one of you noted in some memorable phrases, the preferential option for the poor is the full embodiment of Christian faith, like embodiment, you're acting it out. And it's a voluntary presence with those suffering, as Christ suffered, and as Christ is present. But of course that's kind of from the non-marginalized perspective. So I would add that for those with marginalized identities, preferential option, it also represents a choice to advocate for your own well-being. It represents a choice to see God and God in Christ as in solidarity and present with you in your own struggles for liberation and survival. So, how can we apply liberationist principles during this pandemic? So how might one live out their choice to make a preferential option for the poor at this time? It's difficult to say. It gets hard to work out because we're all, and most of us are in isolation and trying to stay safe and not get sick. And I would encourage you to continue to do that. And maybe that very self-isolation, though, could be a kind of liberative praxis. Because when you're isolated, you can't spread the virus to vulnerable populations. There are other things you can do from home, of course. I mean, you could get online like I do and write about the rights of the working class to your 100 Facebook friends, half of whom have blocked you because of your excessive zeal. You could do that. You could donate something to charities like Meals on Wheels or whoever else is catering to the needs of vulnerable populations. And I mean, I recently joined this Facebook group called Mutual Aid Group Charlottesville. It's based in the Charlottesville community. It's on Facebook. And they do all kinds of things, like they're always talking about sewing masks for medical establishments, donating masks you already have, getting supplies to poorer people, or whatever, the help they need. Or, of course, you could call and email your congresspeople to push them to fight for policies that are going to benefit those most negatively affected by the coronavirus pandemic, which I think are working people and those who don't have health insurance, like those who can't afford health insurance. As Leonardo Boff noted early on in this semester, as you may remember, individual charity is simply not enough. Structural changes in the way that the system functions must be made to ensure that people do not continue to fall into poverty, that they do not continue to be unable to afford health insurance or lose their health insurance when they lose their job. Although personally you may not have the power to effect institutional change, you can attempt to influence your political representatives who can make changes. Now, these are all possible ways, just possible ways, to act on the sense of moral responsibility that the preferential option for the poor and liberationist theologies more broadly instills. Is there a necessity of a moral response to the coronavirus pandemic? Yes. But what is that response? That's up to you to determine for yourselves.